You're all set, Alicia. Yep.
Thank you. Good evening. This is the Mayoral Ad Hoc Committee on Equity and Diversity, and it's October 7th, 2020, and we're calling the meeting to order at 5:33. I'll start with my own introduction. I'm Aisha Hall. I'm a resident of Lewiston. I am the chair of the committee, and I am always happy to be here. And I will pass it on to Mayor Care to introduce himself. And you're muted, sir.
Yeah, I'm so used to running meetings that I never unmute myself. So when I do, I forget. So thank you for the introduction. My name is Mark Kerr, and I'm the mayor of Lewiston, and I'll pass it off to Councilor Jelinas.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Jelinas, and I am City Councilor for Ward 7. And I will pass it on to Deputy Administrator Dale Dowdy.
Yes, I'm Dale Dowdy. I'm the Deputy Administrator for the City of Lewiston, and I'll pass it on to Dennis.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dennis Dote, City Administrator for the City of Lewiston. I will pass it on to Adjourn Physics.
Adjourn Physics, Civilian School Board Member, Ward 2. Just hopped in late, so whoever hasn't gone yet.
Sophia, you want to go ahead?
Sure, thank you. Hi, everyone. Sophia Khalid. I'm the City Councilor for Ward 1. I'll pass it on to Marcella.
I'm Marcella Paris. I'm the Library Director for the Lewiston Public Library, City of Lewiston. I will pass it on to Chief O'Malley.
Hello, I'm Brian O'Malley. I'm the Police Chief here in Lewiston. I'll pass it on to Tanya.
All right, thank you, Chief O'Malley. Tanya Bailey Curry, clinical social worker with Bates College and lifelong native to Lewiston. And I'll pass to, I don't know who went already. Noelle, have you gone?
Thank you, Tanya. Good evening, everyone. I'm Noelle Chaddick. I'm the Vice President of Equity and Inclusion at Bates College. Sorry. Hi, Dane. I'll pass it on to you.
Right on time, I guess. Dane Morgan, local realtor here in Lewiston, and let's enjoy today. Here we go. Who's missing? Who didn't go? Gonna throw a name.
Me.
Andrew. Is this hot? Andrew.
Yeah. Andrew. I'm Andy Duramo, lifelong resident of Lewiston and former member of the Lewiston Police Department. And is that everybody?
Hawa.
Hawa?
Yes. Hi, thank you, Andy. Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Hawa Abdul. I'm with Lewiston Public Schools. And I believe I am the last one, maybe. Dennis?
That is, so who else hasn't introduced?
Marcella?
Chief.
Chief O'Malley. How did we forget? Last but not least,
I'll go a second time, but I passed it to Tanya. I'm Brian O'Malley. I'm the police chief here in Lewiston, so I'm going to pass it to the chair, and she can get started.
Great. All right. So we're going to jump right into where we left off last week, into our discussion. City staff will present the process by which citizens' complaints against police officers and other city employees are investigated.
Good evening. Dale Dowdy will start us off with the city side of things in terms of investigations and complaints. And then it'll roll over to Chief O'Malley, and he'll discuss specifically the police department process. Dale, take us away. You're muted.
There we go. I have my button on the share screen. That's why. So yeah, I'm going to share my screen for a moment, if you guys don't mind. Let's see. Is it going to let me share to there or not? Uh-oh. Let's see. I'm going to have to unshare and reshare, I guess. Oh, here we go. Can everybody see a PowerPoint right now?
Yep. Yes, sir.
Excellent. Good, good, good. Slideshow from the beginning. So as you, I'm sure you all know, complaints come in many forms. And, you know, there's everything from my road needs to be paved. It's the worst in the city. We receive many, many complaints every week throughout the city. The city has damaged my recycling container. You know, some of those just normal procedural everyday complaints. And then they kind of escalate up to something a little more substantive. You know, Inspector Smith fined me for making alteration in my home without a permit. And that's another little bit of a level there. And then my road is not being paved because everyone here is, and you can fill in the line, everyone here is of color, everyone here is French, everyone here is Jewish. You know, once one of those things happen, that's the next level up. So there's complaints, those become much less frequent, but those happen. And employee Smith confronted me in an intimidating manner. That happens from time to time. Somebody reports either internally or externally that an employee has stolen city property or stolen their property or damaged their property. So you can imagine they come in many flavors. I'll make that a little bit smaller so I can see my own slides. You know, minor investigations are often led by the department head or a manager. So my road hasn't been paved for 30 years is really something the department head would look into and respond to. Some departments have, I think the chief will describe his, Public Works where I was, have a tracking system that when a complaint comes in or a concern comes in or a defect in Public Works comes in, goes into a system that's tracked, that's assigned to a manager or supervisor to manage, get back to the resident and then move on. More significant complaints, you know, we kind of went down kind of a list of fabricated complaints, but are typical of what we get, are really now get escalated. The manager may receive a complaint or the department head may receive a complaint, but that complaint has, you know, something like theft, has something like intimidating manner, might have a protected class listed, like we talked about a moment ago, discrimination, or any of those may be intimated as part of that complaint. That comes into City Hall and really comes to the HR director and deputy city administrator. And working with the city administrator, we decide how to engage that complaint. And we may have one of our AHR staff, we may have a subject area expert if we have somebody on staff that we need to have assist us, and we begin an investigation. More serious complaints, and these are kind of an escalating scale. Complaints that we just feel either really are best done by a third party. They might be a complaint against a department head. They might be a complaint where there's a perceived or real conflict or bias that might be here. And I can tell you within the last probably 8 or 9, 12 months, there was one of these, and we hired a third party to come in and investigate it and report back to the city administrator. We have another one we're working on now that at some point we may or may not go out to a third party, and that can happen as the investigation continues. Some complaints on how they're filed and what they are may go somewhere outside the city. We'll talk about that at the very end. There are some state and federal agencies that need to investigate some things. And obviously criminal complaints may get directed right to the appropriate law enforcement. And then other times there may be dual investigations. When I was at the state, we had a lot of dual investigations where there were internal policies broken at the same time. There may have been a state law broken or a local ordinance broken, and that got referred to the appropriate law enforcement. And those investigations kind of went on independent dual tracks and worked through the process. What I will say is oftentimes one of these complaints will come in and it'll appear minor at the beginning. And as the investigation begins, elements will begin to become clear, and that'll escalate to the next level or the next level, and that frequently happens. So just because it's begun at the department head level, once that's reported to Dennis and I as they start to work through it, we and they may choose to bring that up to the next level or even the next level. So just because an investigation starts at one level doesn't mean it stays there. Investigations, again, this is probably no surprise to anybody, include lots of things. They include interviews of knowledgeable parties, witnesses, other experts. Sometimes it's might be an external expert. You know, we have some external experts on this panel in lots of different areas. So that may be part of the investigation, but usually, typically, there are a number of interviews. Record searches. I mean, if it's related to time theft or related to something else, it may be timesheets that are investigated. If it's related to a fraudulent document, we may be looking at documents and dates and things like that. Oftentimes, video logs. We have lots of cameras throughout the city network, both in municipal buildings, around municipal buildings, but also out on the street. So we may use those cameras or cameras from a business if an employee has done something inappropriate, and we'll take a look at those. Computer logs, obviously electronic logs. That's another way of a document search, but it's electronic instead of paper. Vehicle logs. Most of the vehicles in public works, all the heavy vehicles, have AVL, electronic vehicle location systems on them. There have been a couple of citizen complaints where someone nearly hit me or they were driving too fast, and we would go into the logs to one, see if they're even there, see how fast they were driving. You know, your snowplow damaged my house because it threw snow way into my front lawn. So we can actually look how fast the snowplow went by. So vehicle logs are often deployed. Once all the information is collected, that generates into a written report to the administrator. And then we would sit down and discuss what action we might take based on that report. Complaints are measured against a number of things. Obviously, state and federal law. You know, somebody breaks a state law, somebody steals something, or federal law. Somebody does violence on someone else or threatens violence. We've had quite a few of those at the state, and hopefully not any here. Substance abuse. There are a lot of federal laws associated with different types of drivers we have, like CDL drivers. The Health Insurance Portability Accountability Act, which most people know as HIPAA. That happens from time to time. A supervisor might disclose medical information they shouldn't have to another employee. We would investigate that. So things are measured against federal law. Things are obviously measured against city ordinances because that's the next level of law. Someone broke in a city ordinance. Collective bargaining contracts, we'll talk about that a couple times through this discussion. We have 6 contracts throughout the city. For each group, a class of worker pretty much has a bargaining agreement. There are things in there about when you'll work, how often you'll work, what time you'll work, how work processes, how you'll treat other employees. So that's obviously one of the things we would measure our investigation as a milepost as we measure inappropriate activities. Our master policies and departmental policies, things that are not an ordinance, but are more policy driven and that are not in our collective bargaining contracts, like our ethics policies, a lot of our personnel policies, how employees will interact with one another and interact with the public are in our personnel policies. And those are all standards we can investigate against. Each department, you've heard a lot about the chief's policies and how he holds them. Most departments have policies, just simple policies and current policies about these things, right? All of our departments have those. And if someone's not following the policy, we may be investigating them, putting other employees or the public at risk. So our master policies and our department policies are all standards we would investigate and measure an employee's conduct against. I mentioned a moment ago, there are 6 contracts. Each contract, which Dennis and I at times kind of scratch our head a little bit about. You don't have to go very far through the hair, but are written a little bit different. Now they all have about the same themes. I've given you some bullets out of MSCA here. That's one of our contracts. the Maine Service Employees Association is one of our contracts with one of our groups, and it just has a little more specifics and it's laid out in a little more methodical manner. So I use that one here to show you how that directs how we perform our contracts. And the police, Brian has 2 contracts, and I'm sure he's going to talk a little bit about how those contracts integrate with this. He has 2 out of the 6. This article, the preamble to it, it's how complaints will be made or how they'll be managed for internal and external. They apply to only matters that the city has determined must be investigated. You know, some wrongdoing or some complaints really don't need a formal investigation. They're very quick, they're very black and white, right? But others require a more in-depth investigation. So even the short ones are an investigation, but they're very short. The investigation is determined by the city administrator's office. We would determine what level we talked about at the beginning, where that would be conducted. And the rest of that kind of really talks about the timing. This contract says 60 days, others are silent, some say more or less. And there's a whole middle piece in there that's really talking about investigations aren't really normal supervisory interaction with employees. Not completely sure why that's there, but I think that's pretty much inferred, but that's what that says. Then it goes on to say the appropriate directors in concert with Human Resources Director will determine that allegations of misconduct or other complaints against an employee will require an investigation. Again, sometimes they're pretty black and white. You know, the employee wasn't at work that day, he wasn't even here. He couldn't as part of an act of the city. That would be one thing. But he was here, he or she was there. That complaint may have veracity. That would be looked into. That would be determined that we do need to do some level of investigation. This contract also says the employee will be given 2 days written notice before being interviewed. And that's just for the employee to get in the mindset, remember what he's done, he or she, or what activities occurred. We would also contact everyone else. Again, this is protecting the employee, but at the same time, we're contacting the complainant, we're contacting any witnesses or anyone else that we should interview other employees. This part of the contract's really focused on the employee itself, but at the same time, we're also contacting them and setting up interviews. Interview of that employee, again, the employee that's been accused, under formal investigation will be conducted in a reasonable time at a reasonable place during work hours. We're not going to show up Sunday and interview them. Confidentiality, and this will come up a little bit later. Again, we'll talk about that. Of the interview shall be maintained. We're under contractual obligation during the investigation to keep that interview confidential with the employee until a determination is made of that employee, the veracity of the complaint and what we're going to do about it. The employee will be informed when the investigation is complete. And we're going to talk about what happens if the investigation is substantiated. But right here it says what happens, the next paragraph will say what happens if it's determined that it doesn't have veracity. It isn't. If it is unsubstantiated, if we go through the whole process and in the end, that employee, we didn't determine the employee had wrongdoing, those records are expunged, those are destroyed. And that's consistent with state law and consistent with this contract. Again, that's the contract that's really focused on the employee. We'll step back and talk a little bit about the broader. If the allegations and complaints are substantiated, all the contracts have a little bit of different wording, but here are kind of some of the tools we could use in any one of the contracts. If it's a minor offense and we really think an employee didn't understand or really isn't performing well, it's really a performance issue, we develop a work plan. And the work plan is really a set of expectations and measurable goals that we'll work through with the employee. So I do want to point out, it could be any one of these tools or it could be a combination of these tools. So work plans are often used tool to help an employee get back on track. Targeted training, certainly here, but at the state, we often sent people to training around gender in the workplace, people around being a better supervisor when people really weren't being a supportive and good supervisor based on an investigation. So targeted training to help the employee better understand. Again, that doesn't mean that's the only thing. That means that's a tool, and that targeted training could be very much along the lines of this group and should be at times. Substance use treatment. We have from time to time, unfortunately, we have employees that are have got themselves into a substance use problem, both alcohol and drugs. Part of some of the federal regulations related around CDL workers and others require that we go through a process of getting them treatment. And we also, with regular employees, we've had, since I've been deputy, we've had one where we've had to work through a process of treatment, again, in combination with some of these others. And then the kind of traditional thing that we've always talked about is discipline. And each contract has the ability to use progressive discipline up to termination. Progressive discipline, I think most people know, is really an escalating response that to that behavior. That's the lowest level possible, with the intent of correcting the issue, correcting the poor behavior or the poor performance. It's not really meant to start at 1 and go to 4. It's not really meant to go to 4 instantaneously. It's really trying to determine, obviously, if something has gone wrong, we can use those other tools, but if we have to use discipline, what's the lowest level of discipline we can execute with hopes that that'll reoccur. You know, somebody steals something from the city, we're probably going to the 3rd or 4th bullet, right? Suspension or discharge. If somebody is just unprofessional in their internal dealings here, we're probably starting at, you know, somewhere in the first 1 or 2, and a next occurrence might go to the next one, and the next occurrence might go to the next one. But progressive discipline isn't necessarily step 1, step 2, step 3, steps 4. It's really the lowest level of discipline to correct the behavior and the seriousness of the case. So, you know, if it were around discriminatory behavior that was egregious, you know, again, we may step to step 3 or 4, depending on what that is. Any disciplinary action imposed, this is out of that contract, upon the employee, may be subject to a grievance. So employee has a right to grieve it. If they're part of one of the unions, they have the ability to have union representation throughout the process, but at the end, they have the right to grieve and go through a process. And the grievance process starts at the supervisor or the level that was issued from. So if it was issued from the department head, step 1 would start there. It would go to step 2, which might be, depending on where it starts, with the next level up. 3 is with the administrator, and then beyond that, we step into things like arbitration or mediation, where a third party comes in and decides whether the city took an appropriate action based on the evidence that was in front of them. Complainants' rights. We have talked just a little bit about that. There are a couple things. The Whistleblower Act and our policy, this is our policy, or piece of our policy. All those policies and a lot of the stuff I'm talking today about is on the OneDrive for you. If you want to go in and read them in more detail, I'm kind of skimming over them. The whistleblower policy really relates to employees, but we would treat an external party in exactly the same way, or at least along the same tenets, not exactly the same way. But we can't discriminate, we can't discharge, we can't discipline an employee who doesn't want to, who has reported a suspected violation of law, who refuses to carry out a lawful or an unlawful request, who reports a condition that's unsafe, participates in an investigation or hearing, and that's important. And we'll talk a little more about that on the next slide. So if an employee, if there was an allegation against myself or Dennis and a third party went out and did that investigation under the mayor's control, which is what the rules say for most cases, you know, someone in our office testified that we had done something wrong, then we can't, the city would be held liable against this law if the city were to, or if one of either Dennis or I were to hold that employee accountable for his testimony. And reports abuse and neglect of children or disabled adults. Many disciplinary actions or many work plans have a non-retaliatory clause in it, and for good reason. If someone from outside the city were to report, or even inside the city were to report or make an allegation, and that allegation was substantiated, that usually inside the discipline and inside the work plan, there would be a clear statement that that employee can take no retaliatory action against either the reporter or any of the people who testified. If that were to be the case, then additional disciplinary action would occur. So that's often a line we put in things. We should probably get it in almost all of them, unless it's very benign, but that is something, and the city takes that very, very seriously. What can a complaint know about? So one of the first things we do when we get a complaint externally is we contact the complainant. We enter it into one of our systems if that department has a system. And then we usually get back to the complainant, and we let the complainant know that we take it seriously. We've initiated an investigation, and we'll take appropriate personnel action based on all things we just talked about. We can't really tell them how the investigation is going, and I'll tell you why in a second, in addition to the contract language. And we can talk to them later on, way later on, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So we let them know we're taking it seriously. A lot of times we're going to come interview them and sit down with them, and that's usually when we'd explain that. And here's the other part we explain to them. State law prohibits disclosure of discipline, and I think the chief will touch on this as well, until the action is final. So if a complaint doesn't end up in action, we can tell somebody that it didn't end up in any action because it wasn't substantiated. If it does end up in an action where we've taken any of those disciplinary steps, or we're contemplating a disciplinary step, all that must stay confidential. And here's just a little excerpt out of this law. You certainly can look it up. I haven't done it yet, but I will drag it on to the OneDrive for you. So, complaints, charges, accusations of misconduct, all of those things have to stay confidential until a final decision is made. And a final decision isn't necessarily what we all think it is. So say we go through an investigation, we issue a discipline to an employee, and that employee has that right to grieve it. During that grievance process, that information needs to remain confidential for the whole process. What does become a public record in the end is the actual disciplinary document once the employee has exhausted all his rights. There are time frames. Those time frames stack, and they can go up to sometimes a year and sometimes more. So the outcome may not become public record for up to a year or more, depending on how many of those steps that employee chooses to take. Venues beyond the city. There are a couple things. If people are not satisfied with the city's response, there is the Maine Human Rights Commission. And the Maine Human Rights Commission, especially against most entities, but specifically public entities, especially if people's human rights they feel they've been aggrieved of those, they have the right to go to the Human Rights Commission. And then, of course, there's always the opportunity to sue the city or state or whatever entity that is, the city in this case, in state or federal court, depending on the issue. And that does occur from time to time. So that's really what I have so far. If anybody has any questions of any of that, I'd be happy to talk about it. I think the chief will have somewhat of a parallel kind of presentation as well, a little longer. But
I'm looking, I don't see any questions. Oh, Andy.
Dale, I understand the difference between a formal and an informal complaint. Do you track an informal complaint?
Yes, yes. We track some departments, in fact, we've been, I'm not muted. Some departments have systematic methods. Dennis and I have been going around the departments. That's something we'll probably be instituting with the others. But the departments that get the vast majority of the complaints, just because their interaction with the public, certainly the police department, and you'll be talking to Brian in just a moment about it, Public Works gets a lot, as you might imagine. And everything from they're just out and with people, interacting with people in the garages, in the buildings. There are quite a few, and there are quite a few in here. So we not only track them, but we discuss them with the department head or that supervisor, and make that determination of where that escalates up that hierarchy I talked about at the beginning. So an informal, a casual complaint can become a formally investigated complaint fairly rapidly. And I think either Dennis or I could tell you about a number. I know Dennis can tell you about a number in other departments that came in as a very casual comment. That department head looked into it. It started to kind of unravel a little bit and lead into other areas and got escalated into City Hall.
But even with like an informal complaint, say somebody says the employee was rude, is that documented somewhere so that if there's a trail of those types of complaints down the road?
I think we need to do more of that. I don't know that we're complete with that, but we are. If the employee, if it was related to, in Public Works, if it were related to an action going on, that would go into our Beehive system and would require action of the next supervisor. I would guess that if it were just an employee was rude, we're going to contact, typically if that's a complaint that comes in, we're going to contact that individual. Usually it's the department head that contacts that individual and has that interview that makes, that escalates it. Sometimes the complainant says, no, I'm all set. And probably those, Andy, right, aren't tracked today, but probably really should be. And that's a good point.
Thank you.
And can I ask, you said that there isn't a system for each of the departments for making a formal complaint. Like there's not like a complaint box where you can drop something in or something like that for each. Okay.
There is electronically. We have an electronic one citywide, and those come in through Dottie right here in City Hall. And any of those complaints, even an employee was rude, you know, if that comes in electronically or by phone to City Hall, those will go out to the department, and both Dennis and I are copied on them. So there is a record of them via email. So I don't, right now we don't have a system, so we can't do analytics on it. I think that's probably something we should talk about. But if those do come in, those go to the department head, and at the same time, Dennis and I get copied on those when they go, so we see them all.
And I would just add, so in our office, all of those, as you said, it's a reported feature. You can see this right on our website. It's out there for the public. So it's really a feature, and Dale is right. I mean, a bulk of our complaints, informal or formal, really come through that. I do see that frequented. And, you know, some of them are really minor, and then others do require a little bit more investigation. And one other point, you know, sometimes folks aren't necessarily even seeing what they're saying to us or reporting something as a complaint. And that may very well, we may hear something, and I could tell you plenty of scenarios where I've heard something that seemed like just an innocent reporting from a resident. They were just kind of explaining something, and that triggered an investigation request from myself because I didn't like what I heard or something concerned me. And to their eyes, through their view, maybe it wasn't anything major, but from my view, it was. And it was a concern, and we wanted to verify that there wasn't something more there. So that does happen. So, but again, through the tracking, what we don't have is a citywide policy, I think is what I'm kind of hearing in terms of the process in which to track it. We have a lot of different systems, software, like again, that reported feature, the program that Public Works, there's no question, some great documentation there. I know our police department does have a policy. Again, you'll hear that from the chief and some, you know, processes that they follow that's specific. We don't have that holistic approach. But in terms of documentation and tracking, I think it definitely can be improved. There's some there, and we do a good job in areas, but definitely room for improvement from a citywide holistic approach.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions? Tanya?
I think Stephanie had her hand up before me, though. And was like, I don't know, kind of.
Thank you, Tanya. I was just going to add, Aisha, that I think another way that the complaints sometimes come to us is in the form of a constituent reaching out to their city councilor. So that's a pretty common, I know, you know, in the short time that I've been a city councilor, that's and then I'll immediately reach out to whoever I think the department head is, as well as, Dale and Dennis. But that's another common way that I think people are, and sometimes, like Dennis said, they don't realize they're just bringing our attention to something. And then sometimes I'll elevate a concern in Dale and Dennis once I bring it to their attention.
And I think it's great that councils do that, because that very much is like the Dottie one, where Dennis and I will see them. And sometimes we will see something in them that isn't apparent at first, either from the council or from because we've seen a history of something, or there's another element to it, and those will get ratcheted up at that point.
I have a question. I've been thinking about how to ask, but it's regarding our new Mainers. Like, if they had a concern or a complaint, is there some sort of outreach, or would they just have to go to some outside community support to be kind of a liaison for that process? Because I'm thinking, I'm new here, and I know if I had a complaint, I'd have to do some thinking about the process of doing that. Is there anything, what does that look like for a new Mainer, for example, when they want to go to?
I think there's a lot of different venues. I'm not really, because I'm not a new Mainer, I'm not sure what exactly those impediments are, but obviously, as Dennis said, if somebody wants to get on the webpage, it can. That might be challenging for many for language reasons. There are a fair number of people that actually come to City Hall, and we do see a fair number of new Mainers just walk into City Hall, and Janet will walk down the hall and grab Dennis or I, and they'll kind of file a complaint with us or even with Janet, and we'll get back to them. So they certainly can do it in person right here at City Hall, and they can do it at any of our departments. I'm not sure those are all the perfect venues by any stretch, but obviously by phone, by email, by electronic means, or even just any of our employees, and most of our employees will come back. And we do get a fair amount through Public Works and others, where an employee is on the street and they'll hear a complaint about another department or another person, and that will trickle up through the same process. So I don't know that I answered your question directly, but any of those work for us, and anything else for recommendations.
It was more of a discussion about, are we thinking about these things? Also, I know we have a language line. Are we attached to a language line? Okay, cool. Tanya, anybody?
Yes.
Yeah, Tanya.
Thank you, Aisha. So say you have a citizen complaint about something to do with race. Like, I had an interaction with a city employee and felt that employee was, say, biased, or, whatever, something around that realm. And with the limited resources that the city has for around, cultural diversity, the two trainings that we have that we know are outdated, and that's something that we're looking at. But how do we then develop a work development plan or a personal development plan for that employee to increase their sensitivity around that with the limited resources that we have currently? Are we outsourcing that, or how are we handling that?
I can jump in, Dale, just for start of that. So, because we have dealt with some of these types of situations. So depending on the nature of the complaint, Dale alluded to it there. You're exactly right that we would look likely if it was that type of complaint and we just did not feel that we had the training or the experience on staff to address it, then we would absolutely be bringing in the third party for the investigation. And generally, the third-party investigator is a HR consultant, experienced in those worlds. So it's not just an experienced investigator, but they're bringing the entire package of that they can actually consult with us and guide us on appropriate steps and recommendations on how to address the issue.
Okay, great, thank you.
James, I see James' hand.
Do you have a list of these consultants that you have like in the files? I'll call this one up or that one up, or how do you find them?
We have really 2 or 3 that we have used in the past. So what we do is we generally will look for credentials when we're looking for some, maybe they retired or they're, we've had to make a change, or maybe, what we've had. I can't think of a situation where we didn't have consultants that we were experienced with that didn't have the experienced themselves to deal with an issue yet. But I suppose, you know, the process would be like any other time that we're going for a vendor and we're looking to, you know, change or make or add to the list. What we would do is go through a vetting process of them. It would be required to provide their credentials. What is their experience? What's their knowledge? Probably an interview. Certainly, I can tell you towards the end of last year had an investigation that I did feel that it was, there was multiple reasons why a third party was really warranted. And it was a new one that I hadn't really had a ton of experience with, went through, but they had the background and experience and knowledge that I felt would lend well to what we were dealing with. And so we did. I interviewed them, got the credentials, more or less, and then awarded the investigation to them and was able to proceed. Yeah, go ahead.
See, James.
Thank you. What, is there certain criteria you have? Or is it case by case?
It's case, I think it's, so we have a few that we've used in the past and experienced with and know and understand their credentials. If it's, we got to look at it by case. The process, I think, that we go through to vet, you know, is the same process, interviews and understanding the credentials and that. But, you know, we have to be a little flexible with that process and being open to, you know, finding the right experience or expertise depending on the issue. I think we're fortunate with what we have so far, and we do have some good folks that have assisted us with some pretty delicate issues in just my short time here. But yeah, that's basically. Does that answer your question, James?
Yeah, one more though. So sorry, I'm on a roll. Does the person who's filing a complaint have any say in who this person is?
So yes, I mean the person. Well, not any say no in terms of choosing the investigator. We don't ask them to choose the investigator who's making the complaint. But the you know, what we will generally do is notify the complaint or the persons that will certainly be interviewed who will be conducting the investigation. And this has happened in my career where the individual says, you know, I know that investigator. I got an issue with that investigator. Okay, you know, and then at that point we would pivot back to the list potentially, or understand first what that concern is. What's the reason that there's there? If this, you know, substantiated that, you know, this isn't going to be a good situation for that investigator to carry forward, then we would go and probably either go to the list and try to find someone that had a similar skill set and we felt, or we may have to do a search to find somebody else if it was really a unique situation. But they have the right, and that has happened, and we have reacted that way, where, you know, they've expressed a concern about the individual and, you know, some history there, and, you know, wasn't, you know, necessarily substantiated all the way, but I do recall that we made a change just, you know, out of the sake of erring on the side of caution, in a sense, to not create a problem. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
Aisha.
Sorry, I was muted. Tanya.
That's okay. Just a follow up to that. Are the investigators that we use, are all of these folks from Maine? And I'll before I have to ask a second question, I'll explain why I'm asking that. I think Maine as a state, we struggle with our understandings of race relations, the complexities that come along with that, and how to navigate through conflict resolution when it comes to race. So are all the investigators that we use from Maine?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm looking for more hands, and if not, we'll get.
I have a quick question. Sorry. So my question is for Dale and Dennis. Do you think that there's a need at City Hall, or, you know, the different departments at City Hall, for a position or positions like employees who speak multiple languages, that can really, especially for, you know, the language barriers, that when someone walks in for whatever reason, that they can support, but also you know, reach out to the community and build that relationship with the city. I'm just, yeah,
Yeah.
That's where my head is right now.
Yeah, it's a fairly easy one, Sophia. I appreciate that question. I think that would be a great asset to have, you know, within City Hall with multiple languages, the ability to connect within the community, like you just said, and bridge that gap. Absolutely. It's there's no question that would be a benefit and an asset for our community and our City Hall, you know, city organization. So can't argue that. That's a great question. And I think that that's something that would be beneficial.
Thank you, Sophia. Noel?
I co-sign that and add, I wonder about folks' understanding about retaliation and what their rights are if they do report, and are those conversations had in a particular place or space that folks understand that you can report things without retaliation, and is it only at the point of reporting, or is it, you know, something that there's a culture of folks understanding that this is something that we do to make our space better, and it's encouraged, and retaliation is managed in a particular way, and then, you know, sharing that with people in the languages that they critically process in.
I just respond to that, Noel. I mean, I think we do have a culture in the sense within the City Hall or you know, city organization of really a zero tolerance for retaliation and those types of you know, actions, and we really enforce that with our staff. I can tell you, I can't even count the number of conversations on very low level, informal complaints, you know, somebody coming forward, that I almost end almost every conversation with an employee that, look, if you have anything that even feels like it could be retaliation, I want that reported immediately. And that they, you know, and that they have a direct line to me in those situations if they feel that they need to. So I can list employees that I know I've had that I just know that we really want, that's something very important to me, that they feel that, to your point. And that they can come forward and without recourse, and with, you know, to be able to say, hey, you know, I do feel like that. And, you know, and that may trigger another investigation, frankly, if they feel that. And if that's the case, then, you know, we've got to do that. But they know that. And I hope they, you know, they've heard that, but I think that we've really made that an effort to make that a very strong position from our standpoint, that there's just no tolerance for that whatsoever. And in certain situations, I really reemphasize it, depending on what the situation and how serious it is. And if I think there's a strong potential for it, I'm really going to make sure that employee, and I've done this and even checked in with the employee after a little bit of time, you know, make sure that they are comfortable with how things have proceeded, and that there isn't, especially if there was a high concern or potential for a retaliation, or they express concern, I would certainly do that, or our HR office, you know, would, from that standpoint.
Also, Dennis, I think we, as part of our interviews with external parties, you know, if somebody, it's an external complaint, we have the interview to kind of grab the information, or we're giving them an update that we are starting an investigation. We certainly talk to them about, do they have any concerns? Because we, again, when we take action in the end, we want to make sure that the employee understands that that is not tolerated, and that, so we want to make sure we can assure them that we'll take actions to make sure that doesn't occur.
And I have just a question about that too, and it's probably not something we can answer, and something we probably need to put more thought into. But there are some complaints or some things, and I just know I'm not going to bring to people because of the potential of retaliation. Is there anything that we're doing for that to just make that the culture, not the once we're in the situation, I know I can say something. I don't know what kind of question that is or how it can be answered, but just when we talk about the culture of the culture that we have, going into, like, even me as a citizen, I'm not sure. There are some things that I'm just not going to be open to complaining about unless I'm super pushed, because it just doesn't feel like it'll go anywhere, or there would be retaliation, or it would make me feel isolated as a community member or as an employee. So I guess that was maybe rhetorical, but we can move.
I think that would be interesting to explore, because I think we'd like, I know I would, I assume the rest of the staff on would also be interested to hear why people feel that way. Until we understand that, it's hard for us to get a culture outside that people feel comfortable coming to us, because we certainly want them to.
Mark?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think if community members are at a point that they're not feeling trusting enough to either report to the police department a complaint or to city administration or any department, that's definitely a warning flag. Right. And I think as a culture within the city, if we can encourage or provide training that betters our customer service, I think that would be a way of showing our community that, hey, we're all in this together, that you can trust that if you come in and file a complaint, that it'll be handled appropriately and thoroughly. So that's a really difficult question, because when I hear it, it almost gives me shivers that we never want a community member, whoever it is, to ever feel uncomfortable with filing a valid complaint, you know. And I'm sure Dennis and Dale, when they hear that too, it's like, yeah, how do we make sure that that's never an issue? But I think it all starts with customer service. And if we're treating our citizens like they're truly a customer of the city, with politeness and reaching out and offering ways. I say this to Dennis, we have this discussion, if not several times a month, pretty regularly. Sometimes we have to say no to folks, but we should always say no, but, you know, let's see what we can do to, you know, to try to get you a place that is going to be helpful to you. And we do have great employees that have excellent customer service, but I think like any large organization, you know, we occasionally have employees that come in after a bad day. And those are the ones I think that we have to strive to help to get to a better place.
Tanya?
You know, I really appreciate hearing the level of seriousness that the city has around folks, you know, community members' comfort level. I would say that I think that's part of the reason why this committee is so important, because we are collectively sending a message to people that have not felt comfortable enough, safe enough, seen enough. And I mean, I can attest just from my own experience of being a lifelong, you know, citizen of Lewiston. Folks with skin like mine have not always felt seen or comfortable to be able to come into the city building and say, hey, this has been my experience, for, you know, for one reason, for example, fear that they're not going to be believed, right? That's what privilege does. It silences those that don't feel seen and heard. So I do just appreciate the fact that this is one way that we are saying and sending a very large message to folks that have had those feelings that that's not what the city stands for, and that we want folks to feel comfortable and to come in and be able to address those concerns. So there's no question here. I just, you know, I really want to say that I appreciate that, because that I do think that we're missing a lot of people that maybe had not so great of an experience and didn't know where to turn or what to say or do. Yeah. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Tanya.
Sure.
Chief O'Malley, want to segue to your presentation?
Sure. I'm going to go over quite a lot of information.
Yeah.
I'll share the PowerPoint with Dale to give to the rest of the folks. I'm going to try to go through some of it. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. And a lot of, as what Dale said, a lot of our policy is based on the CALEA standards that we have to follow, but also a lot of it's based on the union contracts and then state law. And if you have any questions as I go along, I'm going to kind of shrink everybody on my screen here so I can see my own screen. I'm going to go through the policy, the internal affairs policy. It's a policy of this police department, this agency, not to discourage the public from bringing forth legitimate complaints with concerns of allegations of criminal conduct, neglect of duty, violation of department rules and regulations or procedures, the conduct by a member or employee that would reflect unfavorably upon the individual or the department, and any policy or procedural problems that they may have encountered. Although most complaints received at our time originate from citizens served, it's the policy of the police department that all complaints filed against the agency, its members or employees will be fully investigated in a prompt, thorough, and timely fashion. The authority and responsibility for the supervision and conduct of internal affairs investigations, and that's what we call when we do an investigation into a complaint, that when someone from outside of the building files a complaint, will rest with the command of the Criminal Investigation Division. We'll have the authority of myself, the Chief of Police, in performance of this function. And the Internal Affairs Director shall report directly to the Chief of Police any matter or concern which relates to the status of an internal affairs investigation. The Internal Affairs Division has 2 sergeants that are in that, and they're the ones that conduct the internal affairs investigations, and they're overseen by the lieutenant. Whenever possible, when a citizen alleges a serious matter against a member employee misconduct, will be directed to the Internal Affairs Director. We had this discussion a little bit. Andy brought it up about informal and formal, and I'll show you. We have some forms that people can use and how we track it. And we make the decision if, oftentimes in consultation with the person who's come in to make a complaint. If they, sometimes they'll say the officer was rude, or I feel like they didn't do a thorough investigation, or why isn't my accident report done? I can't get my car fixed. My insurance company says this officer hasn't done that. So oftentimes they'll speak to that person and say, well, what would you like to do? Or you want to, well, I'd like to have my accident report. So, there's ways of going with either formal or formal. And there are complaint forms that are available, electronic copies. It's actually on the city website where folks can get those forms to fill them out. And this is an example of the form. You'll see it's the Internal Affairs Investigation Civilian Complaint Control Form. We'll take them any way that people want, if they want to call it in, or if, as I think Councilor Jelena said, if there's a complaint that goes through a city council, it will often go through Dennis and then make its way to me, and then it will make its way to my internal affairs investigation. And on this form, you'll see where I highlighted, you will be contacted within 14 days to advise you of the investigation's progress. And you will be contacted to notify you of any change of status. Please consider the investigation could take 30 days or longer to be completed. So we let folks know that we'll keep them up to date, so they're not coming to the police department and say, boy, it's been 60 days, I haven't heard anything. We keep them up to date with what's going on. And the supervisor will give them that form. If they can't fill it out, we will still take a complaint. We'll have them sign it if they're able to. And then we talk about the 14 days. And this is the complaint form. We're a little different in terms of how they do it the rest of the city. We explain to them that there's an investigation in the complaint or allegation. There may be a criminal or an administrative hearing. It depends on what the allegations are that they're making. We let them know that an investigator will be in touch with them and call them and have to do an interview with them, so they know that, so they don't get concerned. And we talked about, people being concerned. So they're going to know a sergeant will call you. So they're not going to say, why is this cop calling me after I went down to the police station? We let them know that this is going to happen. So that's part of what I just talked about was part of our policy. And then we talk about the union contract, how it affects that policy, where if somebody comes in and provides a written complaint or a verbal complaint that's written down for them, by policy, I have to give within 3 days a copy to the officer and their union steward or their union representative. So they get a copy of the written complaint that's made against them. And then we also have in the union contract that we can have a hearing. So if, say, someone comes in and they want to do a formal complaint, but the allegation is the officer was rude or they didn't do something for them, we will set up a hearing so that they can actually talk face to face if they want to. And oftentimes people feel a lot better if they've had a chance to give their side of the story to the officer, and it's in a less stressful atmosphere than out on the street or in somebody's apartment or wherever this occurred. But that being said, and I have it highlighted here, the failure of the complainant to appear at the hearing shall not in itself constitute grounds for dismissal of the complaint. Meaning, if someone says, no, I don't ever want to see that cop again, I don't ever talk to him, that's fine. We don't just say, okay, you didn't come in, we're not going forward with the complaint. We still go forward with the complaint. And whenever an officer is called in by a supervisor to be questioned about any type of misconduct or discipline may come, they can be accompanied by a union representative. Now, the union representative doesn't act as an attorney, but they're more of a note taker representing the officer that's called in. And now we're back to our policy again, and that's where we say here where we have to notify them 3 days. So our policy is based on the contract. However, again, another highlighted underlined section, except where such disclosure would interfere with the investigation of possible criminal conduct. So if somebody comes in and makes a criminal allegation against the officer, I don't have to let the officer know. I can have my internal affairs investigators start their investigation and handle it without notifying of them if we feel that would interfere with the investigation. And then there's the, if we receive information anonymously, we have what's called an administrative form that if somebody has, say, contacted a counselor, the mayor, Dennis, or myself directly, either through email, phone, we can still go forward with an investigation even without a complainant. We call that an administrative informational investigation. And then once again, though, because of the contract, we have to give them the 3 days, we have to notify them. So then we let them know nature of the complaint, whatever it is, you were driving too fast or you used excessive force, whatever the allegation is, even if we don't have a complaint, we will do an investigation into it. So say someone says, I saw this cop beating someone up for no reason, and they're not the person that they're reporting was assaulted, we'll still do an investigation, even if the person who the allegation is assaulted isn't complaining about it. And that's the form there. And then I'm going to kind of go over this a little bit. Informal and formal investigations. We have a protocol that we have to follow for the informal investigations. And the determination of what makes an informal investigation, if the offense involves a non-criminal matter, a non-serious violation of department rules or regulations. You know, I think I just got one the other day. Oh, I saw your officer go into a store and he didn't have his mask on. You know, so something like that. So it's nothing that serious, no real consequence to it. That's more of his immediate supervisor will handle those type of complaints. The officer was rude to me, that kind of thing, or was unprofessional. That would be an informal investigation. We still track those, but not to the extent in terms of with a formal investigation. I will be notified from the Internal Affairs Director. The watch commander will let me know as well if the Internal Affairs Director isn't in. And that's more of the criminal activity, serious violations, allegations of brutality, excessive force, corruptions, or violation of civil rights. And then again, when we receive a violation of criminal law, this is where, and I think Dale talked about it, kind of these two rails of investigations. We will often, we will conduct our own internal affairs investigation in terms of our policies and rules, but then we will contact an outside agency, the State Attorney General's office, for them to conduct the criminal investigation. In the past, we've had allegations of domestic violence where the state police have come in and done the investigation for us, where the Attorney General's office said, well, the allegation is can be handled by a separate police agency, that they didn't want to come in and do the investigation. So the informal and complaint procedures, you have the allegations, the case facts, there's a form for that. We keep track of the complainant interviews, the witness interviews, investigatory time. You know, we track everything, how long it takes to report, if there was a hearing or court time, the total time that's completed with that. And this is going to be the same for formal and informal in terms of the allegations are sustained, unfounded, exonerated, not sustained, misconduct not based upon complaint. I think Dale and Dennis talked about that. So say they come in and make a complaint about one thing and then your investigation leads to something else that wasn't initially reported. And then policy failure. If we have a policy that that needs to be changed because of there was an incident, and I'm going to refer to one of those at the end of this presentation to give you an example of that. The informal investigation, we talk about the report, the member, the you know, we have to let them know the officer that the complaint is against, what the final outcome was. And we do keep all of those. Dale talked about more of in terms of personnel file if there was discipline, but even if there is no discipline issue, we still keep those internal affairs reports that those are filed and locked locked up. Then the formal complaint procedure is very similar in terms of the tracking, the allegations, the case facts. I'm trying to get through a lot of this because it's getting kind of late. Same thing with the policy failure, the sustained and founded. And we go through all of that. And now this is where it gets a little different when we have a formal investigation and the officers have rights just like anyone else has rights out there. So we have to make sure that the constitutional rights of the accused officer are protected at all times when dealing with criminal matters. And so we have, and I'm going to get to that, we have another form in terms of when we do criminal investigations, they'll be read Miranda. When we're doing a investigation in terms of policies and procedures, that's when we have what's called Garrett. I'm going to get to that. So whenever there's a serious allegation of misconduct by an officer, and it says right here, it shall be the responsibility of the chief of police to report all criminal conduct or convictions of members of the department to the complaint committee of the Maine Criminal Justice Academy Board of Trustees as soon as possible. So that prevents an officer from saying they get in trouble here at Lewiston and then they're going to go and go to Sabatis or go up north to Rockland or go down south to Portland. We report that all to the Maine Criminal Justice Academy, and everybody in the state is certified through the Maine Criminal Justice Academy. So they're the ones that maintain the certification. They're the ones that will revoke, suspend an officer's certification. So that prevents, and when we see that in the news of, well, how'd this officer go from one department to another department? He's had misconduct all the ways along. That doesn't happen here because of the requirements of the chiefs of police or the sheriffs to send this information up to the Criminal Justice Academy. And this is an example, if it's a criminal matter where they have the Miranda warning that's read to them, that would be just like anyone else in a criminal matter, that they would have Miranda if they were in custody to be read to them. And then of course we talk about the administrative investigation. There's Garrity warning. And this is basically, I can order somebody to be interviewed by my sergeants who are in terms of in doing the internal affairs investigation. Now with me ordering them to do that, anything they say can't be used against them in the criminal court, but it can be used against them administratively. And this is the warning saying, basically says, you have to order, you're being ordered to answer these questions. You have to do that. Do you understand what's been explained to you? Because if we don't read the Garrity, then we can't, if they can say, well, I don't want to talk to you, then we say, well, you have to because of this. Then if they don't, they can be disciplined separately for not cooperating with the investigation. And this is a screen. It talks about what the Garrity rights were. It was a law back from 1967. Basically, you're compelling someone to incriminate themselves. So this is where they have, then it can't be used against them in court. So they have their 5th and their 14th Amendment rights are protected by reading them Garrity. We go back again to the union contract that plays into our policy again, talks about union representation. I think the other union contracts have this: no employee shall be discharged, suspended, or demoted for disciplinary reasons without just cause. Again, the notification requirement. And then when, we also have the grievance process. Dale talked about that somewhat. There are actually, 4 steps of the grievance procedure. The step 1 is they try to take it up with their immediate supervisor. Step 2, they grieve it to me. Step 3, they can grieve it to the city administrator, which would be Dale. And if that doesn't work, step 4, and that's when we bring somebody from the outside, an arbitrator, in terms of from the American Arbitration Association, and they hear the grievance. So it's a long process. There's timelines that we have to follow to go through all of that. And I'm just going to kind of go through some of this. And now that we're going to go into state law. So Dale talked about it, and I'm not going to go over it too much about what can we release. And that's really dictated by state law, what we can give out. Personal records are considered confidential. We can't give out things that are in their personnel file, working papers, research, applications, resumes, letters. Basically what we can give out, and Dale talked about it, is if there's been disciplinary action, what that disciplinary action was at the end of the investigation, if there was disciplinary action, but the grievance procedure has to be completed. So I know we've talked about that, so I'm not going to go over that too much. Right, it's here. If disciplinary action is taken, the final written decision related to that action is no longer confidential after the decision is completed, or if it imposes or upholds discipline. Then talks about the arbitration. And what we do give out, this is part of the state law, is when there's investigation of deadly force or physical force by a law enforcement officer, the name of the law enforcement officer is not confidential. That's why you'll see if there is a shooting in the state of Maine, that officer's name is released. You'll usually see it in the paper the next day. And then once the Attorney General's office does their investigation, they release everything. That's why everybody can see the whole report of what's going on, and that's released out to the press. So that is public information when they use deadly force. We can also give information or allegations, disciplinary information to the prosecutors, to the district attorney's office. So it says the section does not preclude the disclosure of confidential personal records and the information contained in those records. That has to be provided in discovery. So if you have an officer that works for your department and they've been found to have lied in a report, and then they later are disciplined for it, that goes to their, that's on their file, even if it's not in their personnel file, if they've been disciplined for it, if they weren't discharged or fired, we have to give that to the ADA, the prosecuting, and they have to give that to the defense attorney, and that can be brought up at trial with a judge if you have an officer that has that issue. And then it's the Maine Criminal Justice Academy has a process in what they do in terms of revoking someone's certification. So if I send up our internal affairs investigation up to the Maine Criminal Justice Academy, they do their own investigation. They actually will call the officer, or if the officer is disciplined or fired, we'll call him or her to come up, and they can agree to testify in front of this board. They don't have to. They give them, I think it's 60 days to let them come up and let them know. They oftentimes will try to get an attorney if they've been disciplined or they've been discharged to try to keep their certification. And there's a couple different things the Academy does. They have, they'll start out with an informal conference, usually with the officer, with an attorney, to try to see if they can work out an agreement. They can do a consent agreement, which means they don't feel that the firing was enough, that they don't need to revoke their certification. The officer may voluntarily surrender their certificate, but they could have a hearing, and there's different reasons. They could suspend it, probate it, revoke it altogether, and that's all up to the Maine Criminal Justice Academy. I mean, if an officer is convicted of any Class A, B, C, or D crime, we talk about, thefts, falsification, forgeries, anything along those lines. That's what this 17A Chapter 1519 and all that is. They can have their certification revoked. If they've pled guilty to any of those, if they've engaged in that conduct, even if they weren't convicted of it. So say it's in a Garrity and they've confessed to, I stole this, or I did, one of these crimes, that can't be charged criminally, but they can still lose their certification. That would be something I'd send up to the Criminal Justice Academy for them to review. If they falsifying or misrepresenting material facts when they first got hired. So if they lied to a police department, that department didn't find it out till after they had already gotten their certification, that would be a way that they would have their certification revoked from the state. Another one is officers cannot engage in any sexual acts with someone who's a victim of domestic abuse. Anybody that they're investigating a crime, that is not allowed. That's a violation of state law, and they can lose their certification for that as well. And this just kind of goes down with what the board can go through. So this is all the Maine Criminal Justice Academy. I can fire somebody, but that doesn't mean I can't take their certification away. This has to be done by the state. They can give fines, probation. And once again, there's confidentiality to majority of these documents. But if they have a hearing, if the officer says, okay, I want to have a hearing, that is public and that's open to the public. And that's when that knowledge would become, everyone would hear about it. So what we do in terms of the formal complaints is we do an annual summary, and that's actually on the web, the city webpage. We put it on there every year. So I have my internal affairs director prepares this annual summary of the number of investigations, the cases that were involved, and that's posted on the website under the police department on the city website. And this is, I just grabbed this off the city website the other day. This is one from January 2019. It talks about the internal affairs report, a little bit of synopsis, of the number of calls. And if you look at this, so complaint categorization. So we had 2 complaints of excessive force. One was unfounded and one was sustained. And then we had 9 internal affairs patrol supervisor investigations. So if you look at those, this is the second column here. Conduct unbecoming an officer, unsecured firearm. 1050 means a police vehicle accident. Unfortunately, we had a lot of those. And then we had an accidental weapon discharge. And that was a policy failure. And that was when an officer had seized a gun and was trying to unload it. It was a small belt buckle 22 that was all rusted, and he dropped it on the floor, which was a tile floor, and that then fired, and an officer actually got shot in the thigh. So we said, well, that's an issue. So then we spent some money to build an area with bulletproof and some walls and some cushioning, so that when we had that, anytime the officers have to try to unload a firearm that they've seized, they have an area to do that. And that's every year that's put on there. So if anybody wants to look at that, that's on the city website. And I can show you that. I think I can stop share. And I'm going to sit one more. They're going to do screen share. If you look on the city website, this is a police department site. It says reporting system. So you have, complaints from the public. It has here the different forms, the civilian complaint form. I'm going to go back. Then you have internal affairs. This is what I just showed you. This is 2019, 2018, 20. So you have a bunch there. So this is all on the city website. And I know I threw a lot at you, but I was trying to get through this because I know we have a few other things that we're trying to do.
Thank you, Chief.
I know that was a lot, and I'll give the PowerPoint to Dale so you guys can look at that. And I think he had on the OneDrive, I had the state laws and the union contracts that are in there, which is a lot to digest. I know, and I tried to fly through that in 25 minutes. But I'll give the PowerPoint as well. And believe it or not, I did try to condense the policy. We have the policy that, and then we have the ways of people reporting. Is it perfect? No, it's not. But there are different ways, and we do take anonymous complaints that we will follow up on if people don't feel comfortable. Because I know I've heard it before. Well, I don't want to go in the police department to make this complaint. So we try to encourage, if there's an issue, to speak. Ask to speak to a supervisor, and that begins the whole process for us.
Thank you, Mark.
So I have to agree with the chief. That was a lot of information that came at us really fast. And I don't want this committee to feel like, okay, that was it, and we have just a couple of minutes to ask questions. The chief's going to provide that PowerPoint, and I'm going to encourage now, and the committee can share if they don't feel it, but this probably, the potential for questions about this should be really on the top of the agenda for the next meeting. Are folks okay with that?
Yep.
Because I really think we got to look through those PowerPoints. And one, I actually learned several things here, and I was a cop for 20 years. But I mean, I was really impressed with some of the things the chief said, but that doesn't mean that I don't have some questions as well.
I like that suggestion because it was a lot to chew on.
Well, I was looking at the time as we were going through the other stuff. I knew I was going to try to race through it, but I don't want to race through it. I want to give you folks an opportunity to read that and look through it. So I'll give it to Dale, and I encourage you guys really to look at all that.
Yeah, Chief, and you made it very clear right at the beginning that I'm going to make sure you all get this PowerPoint. So I think you were recognizing that there was a lot of stuff coming at us. So thank you.
So with that said, like are there any questions right off the top? No, because we got 10 minutes. I want to open up for public, we got public comment and response, as well as open it up for public comment for what we just heard and experienced. So Dennis, if you could help facilitate that piece.
So this portion of the agenda is to address anything that we received in public comment emails, between either at the last meeting or between then. We received one. It's from Phyllis Rand. The question and the chief will respond to this. He was aware and shared with this. Training an officer in implicit bias is one thing, but having implicit bias towards people of color can still be a part of an officer's personality. How does LPD monitor implicit bias within its ranks? Chief?
Well, I addressed this, I think, a little bit at the beginning, and it goes towards who we hire, and we do polygraph and we do psychological exams. I think the teaching of implicit bias is important because it makes the officers aware that they have this big, some of you maybe were in this training with me with the city spirit about, this is really a subconscious, Aisha was there. Yeah, and James was there, that this is really subconscious. So by teaching people that this is in their subconscious and say, why are you acting a certain way, by making them aware of that so they can kind of reduce and manage the implicit bias. I don't really know how we would, we track, vehicle stops and summonses that are issued and use of force and things like that. But so I'm not sure how I would track just implicit bias other than making officers aware of it and try to maybe manage and reduce it in their own mind, because they may not even know they're doing it. So how am I tracking that? I'm not sure if that really answers Ms. Rand's question, but that's kind of where I am with that. But the ultimate goal is you don't hire people with explicit bias, and then we try to work with the psychological and the polygraph and the people that we hire and the training we do to make them aware of it.
And I'm assuming that we'll be talking about recruiting and hiring next go round, and so
that's my next PowerPoint. It's definitely not as long as the other two in the video. But yes, that is coming up.
So that was our only. Does anyone else have anything to say about the question, the public question? And do we have any?
I have
questions?
my hand raised. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It's okay. So just to add on that, and I'm just thinking out loud. We are talking about body cameras and that being in the future for Lewiston PD. I'm wondering, and something that I've been thinking more about, how do you measure like implicit bias? It is subconscious. We all have implicit bias. But these are officers who are in the community and are protecting us and serving the community. So but in terms of the body cameras, and I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud, every stop that an officer makes, can the dashboard record that, and can the body camera record that too, and then put that in a report? Sometimes an officer may stop someone because they suspect them of something, and then let them go and not get reported, whatever it is. So maybe that's a solution, to report every stop an officer makes, of course, other than going to the bathroom and stuff.
Well, we're going to have a presentation on the body worn cameras the 13th.
Okay.
And those will be set up to, the ones that we're looking at will be set up to record automatically when the officers get out of the car, when they turn on the lights, when they run, when they take the gun out of the holster. There's a whole myriad of triggers on these body cameras, so that you don't have to rely on the officer turning on or turning it off. That's why I like this body worn, and that's another presentation, Councilor Khalid. But yeah, that would be helpful to have that exchange, although it's an expensive tool, which you'll find out when we do this on Tuesday.
And so just to clarify, we're having a presentation at the city council meeting. Yes. So anyone from this
workshop,
committee,
yeah, I think it's a workshop we're having, and we're going to have a representative from the body worn. I'm kind of getting off topic here, but Auburn PD has gone to those, and I believe they have them installed in their cruisers right now, and then they're going to be going to the cameras on the officers' uniforms as well as what's in the cruisers.
And anyone in this committee, or even any public that has attended most of these meetings, they're welcome to attend the city council meeting to watch that presentation.
And that'll be on the 13th, October 13th.
At 6 o'clock.
At 6 o'clock.
Okay.
That's valuable information. Thank you. Not a waste of time. Any public comment? I didn't see any hands raised in our participant, but no. Oh, but I see a hand behind. Elgin.
Can I make a suggestion? I know we'll be going every other week, and we're kind of a little bit behind. Is there any way that we can go, maybe catch up, maybe do couple of weeks in a row?
Well, we have the 1st and 3rd of every month, which we did know we were going to go over. And how to speed it up. I mean, I'll take suggestions. That's a good suggestion. I know that everybody's schedule is pretty tight in that they are not able to make that many meetings in a row, but I'm open to the.
I'm not saying to go from here on out, maybe just 1 or 2 times to maybe just switch it up.
Well, according to according to where we are, we should only have maybe 2 or 3 meetings. I have our recruiting, then we're discussing our recommendations. Is that correct, Dennis? And then we are moving to give those recommendations to the city council. Is that right?
That's correct. So the next meeting, October 21st, will be the last presentation from the city and the chief from that standpoint. And then it will immediately go into recommendations. So it's really just however many meetings you'll need as a committee to develop that. So to Elgin's point, what could occur is, we could have a discussion, following, the initial discussion around recommendations at the next meeting. And maybe the committee at that point could determine, if schedules align, and that there could be maybe a meeting right immediately after that, the week after or something, to speed this up. To his point, that would be something that could make sense.
Chief, and then James.
Did you still want to hear from the patrol union? I see a nod, so I think maybe we can put that on the agenda as well, Dennis.
Right, and I think it's more, we want to hear from police officers now. Right. I anticipate that the patrol union will want to be part of that, of course, which they're invited. But I think the goal of the committee, and Dennis and I talked a little bit about this, about potentially getting them into the next meeting. But I think there might have to be some further discussion, because we will have the chief at the top of the agenda next week, kind of wrapping this, the investigation one up. And then we also have to
review the recruiting and hiring.
Yeah. So I'll let, so Aisha, if it's okay with you, Dennis and the chief can talk sometime tomorrow and just kind of figure out when the best time to get them on the agenda. Are you okay with that?
I'm okay with that.
You good with that, Chief and Dennis?
I just want to be able to give them some, little warning of when they're going to be scheduled. That's all I'm looking for.
Chief, not to put you on the spot, but do you see the next presentation taking the full hour and a half? No, I didn't think so. I thought
that'll be a lot quicker. It won't be as, I think I just flew through 67 slides. So that won't be the same way. Oh, and Mr. Morgan, on another note, Olivia Bergeron will be starting next Wednesday. So I don't know how much longer she'll be able to be your model of your workout gear, but.
She said I can only have her for one try, one go around. So you got her now. We're good.
Go ahead, James. I see.
You're on mute.
You're muted.
Follow up on Elgin's request. Could we just extend these to an extra half an hour, make them 2 hours long? Seems we're already here.
That's a thing. How's everyone else's schedule looking?
Tight.
It's very tight.
Just saying.
At 7 o'clock.
I got love for all y'all, but whoa, this is rough.
You scared me, for crying out loud.
I just wanted to be known that the schedule is tight.
It's very tight. And again, we know that we're getting to those recommendations and we still have a lot of work to do. So we don't have to squeeze anything. It's been a long road. We've already said September 30th and we're still hanging strong. So I think we should stay consistent with what we're doing. And then like Dennis suggested, once we get to that recommendation space, I think we'll know then where we will need extra time. So if everyone's okay with that, any more comments on it? Next week, October 21st, we're starting with Chief O'Malley. Yay. All right.
And just to go back quickly on Elgin's suggestion, we're going to reevaluate that after next week.
Right.
Okay, good. Thank you.
After next meeting.
After next meeting, yes. Okay.
Thank you, Dennis. Because I was about to say, wait a minute, y'all.
It must be that time. It really must be that time.
Mm-hmm.
After our next meeting, we'll revisit additional time to complete our mission.
There you go.
So are there any other comments, questions, concerns? I'm still happy to be here at the end of this. It still makes me excited, and I'm never as tired as when I started. So I appreciate you all for that.
Oh, Aisha, do we have a public comment?
We did not, but did we? Dennis, we did not have any public comments. Did you have a comment, Howell?
No, I was just wondering the people who's the attendees, if they have any comments.
No, not at this time. If that's it, I won't linger. I like to linger because, again, like seeing all of y'all faces, and it means it's the end of the day for me. But if we could have, anybody want to move to end the meeting, adjourn the meeting? Tanya?
I will move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
And James seconded that. And that'll be all in favor.
Aye.
Until next time. October
you.
21st. Don't forget October 13th. Come out and see about our chief. Thank you, everyone.
Stay safe.